For my thoughts on all the latest happenings in the NFL in a completely relaxed, unscripted format, be sure to check out my channel, JG9 News. And now, on with our feature presentation. September 3rd, 2000. It's opening day of the NFL season, and we've got a battle on our hands in the NFC over at FedEx Field between Washington and Carolina. Now, when all was said and done, Washington would win this game by a final score of 20-17, as they started this new campaign of theirs, a season in which they were expected to be the favorites to win the Super Bowl, considering all the free agent acquisitions they made and considering how well they played in 1999 on a high note. However, I want to show you this one play in particular from this game. It's the third quarter, and Washington kicker Brett Conway just drilled a 24-yard field goal, a chip shot, to make it a 10-10 ball game. Now, it's time for Conway to kick it off deep to Carolina, where Michael Bates is going to attempt to return this one for the Panthers. Take a look at what happens next.
This happened as he got his second sack of the game. The kickoff to Michael Bates, who returned 192 yards. This time he is hung up at about the 25-yard line.
Alright, you might be thinking to yourself, that's a fairly standard, unremarkable play. I mean, it might look a bit foreign, considering the fact that this was an era where kickoffs actually got returned, but why am I highlighting this play in particular? Well, that one play was the only play that Chad Dukes ever made in his career with Washington. That tackle was his only appearance ever on the stat sheet. The running back playing special teams never played again for Washington after that, and didn't play a regular season game before that. The announcer for the game, Dick Stockton, didn't even mention his name. Chad Dukes isn't even so much as a footnote in the team's history. One game, one tackle on special teams, and then we never see him again. However, he deserves to be remembered nearly 2.5 decades later, because his stint in Washington was an absolutely wild one. Was his on-the-field story all that remarkable? Obviously not. But was his off-the-field story remarkable? Oh, you bet. Because imagine being released from a team, only to re-sign with that team minutes later. I'm not even exaggerating. Imagine getting cut, going out to get lunch or something, and then you come back from your lunch break and you re-sign with the team. Well, that's exactly what happened with Chad Dukes in one of the most bizarre roster management stories that you'll ever hear in your life. Because this is the story behind Chad Dukes, and what might just be, considering the circumstances, the craziest roster management in what is now Washington Commanders history. Before I talk about the actual incident in question, and how you can get cut and re-signed in a matter of minutes, we need some context to understand just who Chad Dukes was, and what his experience in professional football was like before this. And as you might have noticed from these highlights of Dukes, his professional football experience, for the most part, was limited to this league right here, the Arena Football League. Dukes didn't do a whole lot in college, as he only had 400 rushing yards and a touchdown during his time at Pitt. But after his final collegiate season in 1994, Dukes did not get any looks in the National Football League outside of a brief stint with the New England Patriots that, by his own admission, did not go well. However, that didn't mean that his football career was over, as he signed with the Albany Firebirds in the AFL, where he played for 3 seasons at both running back and linebacker, and scored 33 touchdowns, playing an instrumental part in particular during Albany's playoff appearance in 1998. Now, for those who don't know arena football, it is very different in terms of strategy from the NFL, as teams rarely, if ever, run the football. Dukes was the best running back in arena football from a yardage standpoint in 1998, and yet, over the course of the 14-game season, he had 364 rushing yards, being the only running back to have over 250 yards all season, and one of just 3 running backs to have over 200 yards. It's not a sport that lends itself to running the ball, and on top of that, remember that in arena football, with the exception of the quarterback, guys play both ways, so some of the tape can be a bit deceiving just because you've got guys going up against players who are predominantly out of position. However, Dukes was a class above everyone else, and every time he got the ball, he was tough to bring down, as he was an absolute bowling ball. Combine that with his obvious versatility on special teams, seeing as you could use him not just as a returner if need be, but as a tackler since he played linebacker in the AFL and was pretty decent at it, and it's no surprise that his days in arena football toward the end of the millennium were not for long, as the NFL would be calling. Because following 3 successful seasons in arena football, including a 1998 season where he was named a first-team All-Arena League member, Dukes found himself on Washington in 1999. For the first time ever, even though it was a highly unconventional path, he found himself having a legitimate shot in the National Football League. At the age of 28, Dukes was going to be competing at football's highest level. Dukes had a solid preseason in 1999. During a scrimmage against the Pittsburgh Steelers, he caught a 4-yard touchdown pass from backup quarterback Casey Weldon. During one preseason game against the Buffalo Bills, with the game tied at 13-all, and Washington having the ball midway through the fourth quarter looking to take the lead, the team drove 87 yards down the field, with Dukes catching 4 passes for 58 yards as Washington won the game 20-19. In an actual preseason game against the Steelers, Dukes led Washington on a touchdown drive in the third quarter, as he caught a Ronnie Pete pass on the drive for a gain of 21. It was clear that Dukes was doing well this preseason, and his time in arena ball was translating to the NFL stage. As one writer said on Dukes during the 1999 preseason, the former Arena League player isn't going to supplant Larry Centers and Brian Mitchell as third down backs, but there may be a roster spot for a guy who makes plays. He has impressed in camp. Another writer wrote later in camp on Dukes in his impressive preseason, the only thing better than having one pass-catching fullback like Larry Centers is having 2. If Washington can't find room for him on the roster, another team probably will. However, sometimes you can do everything right, and it still isn't enough. Because during the final roster cuts, Dukes was released by Norv Turner and company. It wasn't that Dukes did anything wrong, it was just a numbers game. It was always going to be an uphill climb for Dukes to make the roster, considering how many good running backs they had. So for Dukes to make it that close and that interesting was a heck of an accomplishment. Still, when no team picked him off of waivers, he came back to Washington and joined their practice squad. So while he never got promoted to the active roster, or got a chance to play, he did get to stay on the team throughout that 1999 season, and got another chance to compete for a spot on the 53-man roster in 2000. And this time, it felt as though Dukes had a really good chance to make the team, at least better than 1999. He knew that his odds increased a bit when running back Larry Bowie, who had been with the team for the past 4 seasons, was released. So that was one less man he had to leapfrog on the depth chart. Said Dukes, "When Larry left, I knew it meant there was one less running back in front of me. But that doesn't guarantee anything for me." And even though Dukes knew that he had an uphill climb to make the team, having to beat out one of, or maybe even 2 of, a combination of Stephen Davis, Larry Centers, Adrian Morrell, Mike Sellers, and Skip Hicks, he was up for the challenge, knowing his role in saying, first and foremost, I have to make an impact as a special teams player. It would be nice to carry the ball and block, but we have others to do that. I've got to carry my load on special teams. And just like he had in 1999, Dukes had a solid camp and preseason in 2000. During one rookie practice, not only did he have a 17-yard run, which was the longest of the day, but he won the Oklahoma drills against LeVar Arrington, the team's first-round pick, relatively easily. Norv Turner specifically praised Dukes after the team's first preseason game, saying, "Chad Dukes was explosive. We need more guys that are explosive. We need more guys that when the play is over, someone is saying, wow." During another preseason game against the Patriots, Dukes scored a 5-yard touchdown, prompting Turner to, once again, praise him, saying, "I've said all spring, we've got 3 good runners and a young guy in Dukes who would want me to stand up here and say he's a good runner. If he keeps going the way he is, I'll probably do it in a couple of weeks." It seemed like this year, once again, Dukes was doing everything in his power to make the team, and was trying his best to make this a tough decision for Norv Turner and company. However, much like what happened in 1999, Dukes couldn't make it. Despite his best efforts, despite consistently good performances across the practices and the games, and despite praise from the coaching staff left, right, and center, Dukes was the odd man out in a crowded backfield. Because on August 27th, 2000, Chad Dukes was released, unable to make it onto the final 53-man roster. But wait a second, you might be saying. What about that highlight we saw earlier when he made that tackle on special teams against the Carolina Panthers? So he got cut from the team and then came back? Well, yes. Now by itself, this is a non-story. Things like this happen all the time, where a player gets cut from a team during the 53-man roster cutdowns and then gets brought back a few days later, usually to the practice squad, where they will then get promoted to the 53-man roster after an injury of some kind to a player, or someone else gets cut. If that's what happened here, then let's be honest. This story isn't anything remarkable. It's nothing you haven't seen before. If Dukes got cut on August 27th, came back to the team on August 29th, and then ended up playing in Week 1, there's nothing fascinating here. This happens quite frequently. However, what makes this story insane is that Dukes was released on August 27th. Want to know when he came back to the team? That's right, August 27th. Imagine going to work with a job and leaving work with that same job. But in the middle of the workday, you lost your job. You essentially got fired, took a lunch break, and then after you were done eating your lunch, got rehired. Well, that's what happened with Chad Dukes. When the day began, Dukes was informed that he would no longer be playing for Washington, as he was a victim of the numbers game. He had to clean out his locker and hand in his playbook, and he thanked the coaching staff for the opportunity, but for the second straight year, his NFL chances were done on the final day. And then, Norv Turner realized something. Oh crap! We didn't need to cut him. We have a roster spot available. Because we have to go back to the 1999 wildcard round battle against the Detroit Lions, when in the third quarter of the contest, this happened. With Washington leading 27-0 and looking as though they were in complete control of the contest, Brad Johnson threw an interception to Stephen Boyd, and all hell broke loose. You had a fight that broke out and the usual penalties being called, with a bunch of players getting fined afterwards for their involvement in the scuffle. However, getting the worst of these punishments, unsurprisingly, was guard Trey Johnson, who did about the dumbest thing possible you can do during one of these fights. Lay your hands on a referee and tackle him while flailing your arms around and punching said referee in the head. I don't even know what Johnson was trying to do. Genuinely, this is one of the dumbest things I've ever seen a player do. I get why the fight occurred. You want to protect your quarterback. But I don't get why Trey Johnson did this. Johnson said afterwards that he did this because he did not see the official, which seems to be a giant load of you-know-what, considering the fact that the official was right there the entire time, and this still image quite clearly shows Johnson's line of sight, making it impossible to not see the official. You would have to be blind to not see him. However, on January 12th, a few days after the game, the NFL announced that Johnson would not only be fined $50,000, but he would also be suspended for the first game of the 2000 regular season. And this meant that Trey Johnson did not count against the 53-man roster. Now, why no one in Washington knew this, I had no clue, seeing as the announcement was made 9 months ago, and the same head coach in Norv Turner was there for the start of the 2000 season and the end of the 1999 season. However, for some reason, when Washington put in their 53-man roster, it had Trey Johnson on it, with Chad Dukes getting cut. That's when the league called them and said, guys, what are you doing? Remember what we talked about 9 months ago? We went over this. Trey Johnson can't play in Week 1. He punched one of our officials in the head. And when Turner realized, oh crap, you're right, not knowing this vital information for some reason, Turner knew what he had to do. He had to get Chad Dukes back. So in what feels like that scene in The Simpsons where Abe walks in and out immediately, Washington did that here with the man you've been watching this whole time, Chad Dukes. Because just minutes after cutting him, they realized their mistake and they brought him back. Said Turner, "I told Chad when he left at about 10:30, I was going to do everything I could to get him back on the team. I didn't know it was going to be at 3:30. Think about it. You could have been a diehard fan in school, back in a time where you probably didn't have a cell phone with internet, and you could have left for school thinking that Dukes was on the team, and got him back from school still knowing that Dukes was on the team. Meanwhile, in between, you had no idea that he was cut due to sheer incompetence by the front office, who somehow didn't know that one of their own players got suspended, even though it was widely publicized and was announced roughly 9 months before. Either way, for the first time ever, Chad Dukes was on the 53-man roster, even if he made it in the weirdest and most unconventional way possible, where he went out to lunch unemployed and came back from lunch employed. Unfortunately for Dukes, that play I highlighted against the Carolina Panthers was the one and only game he ever played with Washington, as in the team behind me right here. Once Trey Johnson got reinstated after his suspension, Dukes was released, and he would never play in the NFL again after the 2000 season. Although later in 2000, he would sign with, oddly enough, the Jacksonville Jaguars. He didn't do a whole lot, he only had 2 carries with Jacksonville, but still he got to play in the NFL for a bit after that stint in Washington. Dukes would play some form of arena football until 2007, and in 2005, even helped the Colorado Crush win the Arena Bowl. So Dukes was able to make a decade-and-a-half-long career out of being an undrafted free agent playing professional football, and he was quite the legend in Arena Bowl. Not too shabby of a career, if I do say so myself. So, as a word to the wise for coaches and general managers when we get to roster cutdown season, make sure you know which of your players are suspended, because that seems like pretty important information to just not know. Those players don't count toward the 53-man roster. They never have. They go on their own separate list, so you do not have to waste a roster spot on a suspended player. Because if you don't know that, you're setting yourself up for embarrassment and humiliation, much like the situation involving Chad Dukes in 2000, which was a pretty good omen for how bad Washington would be during that 2000 campaign. Even though Dukes didn't do a whole lot in the NFL, he has what might be the craziest cut-down day story ever, where he was cut and brought back in a matter of minutes. Talk about a weird way for the former Firebird to get fired. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.